and we're seeing the response now, incredibly predictable to this virus, which absolutely suits the ambitions of this cult to push the world further and further and further into a global Orwellian fascistic state under the name technocracy. We're past the point where we're looking at the imposition of classic fascism or the imposition of classic Marxism, communism, although the outcome for the people is the same. We moved it on into this technocracy, which was the plan all along. And a technocracy is a society that is run and controlled by, quote, experts and scientists and engineers and bureaucrats. I mean, the European Union is a classic technocracy in terms of its bureaucratic control by unelected people. And the target is democracy itself, because a technocracy does not do elected people. It does appointed people to run the system as they see fit, or as that in the shadows sees fit via them. And so democracy has to go. And what we're seeing more and more are attacks on democracy. And it's very easy to discredit the concept of elected government when you just ensure that your system keeps turning out corrupt and clueless politicians. Because by definition, if you put those in charge, they are going to make a pig's ear of it. I don't know why that is a metaphor, but it is pig's ear for chaos and incompetence. But anyway, the whole thrust is destruction of democracy. And what you're seeing are surveys coming out, sometimes big surveys around the world, by the usual suspects, saying that the population is losing confidence in democracy, which is exactly where this needs to go. Now, if you play this out in terms of the coronavirus, you have seen the reaction eventually of the Chinese technocracy, because that's what it is already. That's why it's a blueprint for the world. In terms of extreme measures of lockdown, of pulling people off the streets, of pulling people out of their homes, and so much more. I'll come to some of it in a second. And then you've got the democratic world, which has not yet responded in that extreme way, though we're starting to move that way in Italy, but and Iran to an extent as well. And those two countries are significant. I'll come to that. And you can see a scenario of psychological manipulation in which China dealt with the virus, quote, successfully, if that's how it turns out, and they're claiming it is at the moment, because of these authoritarian extremes, whereas it wasn't sorted out in the West because of democratic freedom concepts and responses. And if this virus goes on expanding, and of course the hyping of the fear of the virus alongside it, then of course you're going to see support more and more for a suspension of democracy to meet the problem of the virus. So you can see this whole attack on democracy taking a step forward as a result of this virus, which I do not believe for 1 second occurred naturally. So if we go to this first story about China, it says, surprise, China is using COVID-19 to strengthen its mass surveillance of citizens. Well, that was always going to happen. Mentioned it in a video I did with Gareth, 2 weeks ago now, that this is how it works. And of course, following on from that, more and more step by step, the West is going to follow. We're already seeing it. So this story says, and like I say, if this virus is circulating and it is as dangerous as they claim, then of course measures need to be taken to mitigate that. Of course, but I come back to it. Those measures become justifiable by government because of the virus. So where did the virus come from? That's the key. So this story says, as a result of monitoring for coronavirus, the Chinese government is now requiring Chinese citizens to provide personal data, including travel and health conditions, via apps on their smartphone to the government. This is the emerging smart grid control system, which is very much more advanced in China. Based on the answers that citizens give to the apps provided by these organizations, algorithms will try to decide whether or not the person is likely to have coronavirus. So you see that more power all the time is being given to artificial intelligence, which, as I've said for so long, is designed to be the control system of the world. The apps then assign a red, yellow, or green code to the person, depending on their risk of having the virus. If you get a red code, you have to self-quarantine or be quarantined in a facility for 14 days. And citizens can't lie because all the answers they provide about things like hotel stays and travel are cross-checked by AI with the government's data and smartphone location data. Several provinces also have social credit systems where people who lie, as well as smoke, jaywalk, and do anything the government doesn't want them to do, lowers their social credit scores, for which there are consequences. Like millions of Chinese people have been banned from flying and banned from train travel because their credit score has fallen. Their social credit score has fallen. So the story goes on. It all rounds out a picture of Beijing increasing its mass surveillance over its citizens. The surveillance can be effective, as China has supposedly shown during the outbreak, but people must also consider how the surveillance can be weaponized to combat mass protests and individual pursuits of justice. Well, of course, one of the things that's happening is that gatherings of people are being banned in more and more countries. And the story continues, the technology-based anti-outbreak measures are certainly needed now, it says. They have allowed over 10 million people to assess their risk of the coronavirus in this Chinese province he's talking about. The technology being used is in over 200 cities. And in Shanghai, an app is monitoring 245,000 street front shops with data, which eliminates the need for staff to visit them. The technology will help in indicating where the outbreak slows for certain, but there is little transparency, it says, on how Beijing collects the data and what happens to it. One low-level official said, through data analysis, we have mastered the trajectory of everyone's whereabouts. If you have not reported truthfully, our system will find out. So again, we're back to this question, who benefits? Well, just looking at that situation in China, who benefits is blatantly obvious. And it's playing out now across the world outside China, step by step. And you're going to hear people saying, officialdom saying, critics saying, oh, if only we'd have dealt with it like China did, which all is part of this psychological game that's happening. So the more that this coronavirus situation unfolds, the more and more painfully obvious it is that this virus did not happen naturally, but has been created and circulated for reasons of justifying more and more control, which when eventually the virus is, starts to fade in its impact, many of these measures will not be rolled back.